Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's a story you don't tell anyone anymore because no one would believe you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I haven't told this story to anyone in a long time, and I've never shared it with my parents because I still have no explanation for what happened. When I was 15, about 10 years ago, my best friend invited me, my brother, and our other friend to go camping with him and his family. His family drove us up to a dusty little parking lot at a campground in the eastern Sierras called Mill Pond. On the second night of our 3-night stay, we somehow convinced my friend's parents to let us hike up into the hills and set up a tent so we could spend the night on our own. We spent most of the afternoon lugging gear up the hill about 2 or 3 miles from the campground. When we finally finished setting up camp, we decided to go on a twilight hike in the hills. A few hours later, just past sunset, we returned. Exhausted from the day, we called it an early night and went to bed. Hours later, we were suddenly awakened by bright lights shining through the thin fabric of our tent. They were coming from the direction of the hills. My friend guessed there were headlights, but they seemed far away, and none of us heard an engine running or any other sound, just an eerie bright light in the distance. After about 3 minutes, the lights went off. Confused and a little afraid, we decided to try to go back to sleep. I lay down, rolled onto my side, and made eye contact with my friend who was facing me. I'll never forget the look of absolute fear in his eyes. I asked him what was going on, and all he could do was point at the tent above my head. I followed his finger and saw something poking through the side of our tent, pressing the fabric down so that the tip of whatever was poking in was just inches from my face. I screamed in fear and scrambled away from the protrusion. My brother and other friend turned toward me, saw the protrusion, and yelled as well. Strangely, it stayed there while we screamed, only slowly retracting after a good 10 to 15 seconds. We spent the next 10 minutes huddled together yelling threats at whatever was out there. Our shouts and screams were met with nothing but silence. After our voices grew hoarse, my friends convinced me to open the tent flap and look outside. Trembling with fear, I unzipped it and poked my head out. I saw nothing. No vehicle, no tracks, no footsteps, absolutely no evidence of anything approaching our tent. We spent the rest of the night arguing about whether we should hike back down or not. In the end, none of us felt brave enough to make the trek back to camp. We stayed awake until morning, packed up the tent, and walked back down the hill. When my friend's mom asked how our night was, we just grumbled something about the cold. I'm not sure if we were afraid of getting in trouble or just wanted to pretend it never happened. Either way, we've never talked about it to this day. I was staying on my family's farm, which spanned about 300 acres filled with lots of corn, and we had 6 giant sheepdogs, specifically the big white fluffy kind, Great Pyrenees. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard all the dogs barking. This wasn't unusual, as wild coyotes often tried to get to our chickens. So I went outside with my shotgun, and soon my granddaddy joined me. He asked if I saw anything. Nope. We moved to stand behind the dogs, all of whom were fixated on the same spot in the cornfield. We shined our flashlights but saw nothing. We commanded the dogs to move, but they didn't budge. As we started walking around the dogs toward the edge of the cornfield, they came and positioned their bodies horizontally in front of us. I said, "Zeus, what's going on, bud?" The oldest male dog. When I said that, the stalks in front of me shook back and forth as if someone were walking through them. My granddaddy yelled for us to get back. We shined our lights into the corn and still saw nothing. I pointed my flashlight directly down the aisle of stalks that were still moving. There was no wind, and the other stalks remained still. I was baffled. My granddaddy instructed me to fire a warning shot. I did, and then I saw whatever it was run back and forth horizontally, making all the stalks in 3 or 4 rows move. It stopped suddenly, then shot straight back into the thickest of corn. I never saw anything, but those stalks were moving like something was tearing through them, almost like a tornado. The dog stayed outside all night. We stared into the pitch-black space between the stalks, but never saw anything happen that night or any other night again. The next morning, we went out and found tracks I'd never seen in Alabama. I thought about the usual suspects like deer, possum, and coyotes, but nothing added up. My granddaddy's gone now, but I'll never forget that night we spent on the porch, just watching and listening to the world outside in Nowhere, Alabama. There was a point during my childhood when everyone in my house experienced horrible vivid nightmares for about 5 years. Bad dreams aren't that unusual, but having them weekly throughout my elementary school years, often on the same nights as my sister or parents, made it feel relentless. When I was in 4th grade, my mother converted to extremist Christianity. She never brought the rest of us along on her journey, but she would make a point to pray in front of us. A few nights after Halloween, she was praying over dinner and got completely carried away. She was yelling about protecting our house with the blood of Jesus Christ, about us being untouchable, and about rebuking demons. It was bizarre, but eventually my dad intervened and my sister and I decided to forget about it. Later that night, I woke up from a nightmare and the house was shaking. I'm serious. I shared a room with my sister and she was looking over at me wide-eyed. We lived in Wisconsin. Earthquakes don't happen in Wisconsin. Needless to say, neither of us slept at all that night. But I didn't have another nightmare for 10 years after that. As far as I know, none of my family has had one since. I was once sitting in my kitchen in the evening when I suddenly felt an intense desire to go outside and sit down. I argued with myself that I had no reason to go outside. After a few moments of intense debate, I concluded that I have no reason not to go outside and sit down. So I did. I went out my back door, pulled up a fold-out chair, and sat in a spot where I never usually sit. As soon as I sat down and looked up over the tree line into the night sky, a large yellow ball pulled out from the trees and stopped, then pulsed again before shooting across the sky to the horizon like a streak of light. I jumped up and thought to myself, nobody will ever believe this, and went back inside, where a living room full of my friends never heard a word of what had just happened. I sat back down at my kitchen table and contemplated, still contemplating to this day what it was. Unless humans have developed ESP along with UFOs, I'm betting on aliens. So it's either humans with high tech or aliens with regular tech. There really isn't any other explanation. I was borderline autistic and very OCD as a child, and I had my rituals that I followed diligently. As an aside, I learned to read by the age of 2 and had to learn how to sign my name to get my own library card. This was in Mentor-on-the-Lake, Ohio, and the library was, I believe, in Willoughby, Ohio. I was probably 3 years old when this happened, making my brother about 12. Anyway, I had my breakfast and was, as usual, sitting at my pegwood chalkboard desk, which I always insisted be positioned in front of the TV while I watched my shows. I was watching Sky King when a voice in my head said, "Your desk could be an airplane." I thought back, nah, it's nothing like an airplane, but the voice persisted. Yes, you can make it work. Use the lid for one wing and the bottom for the other. One leg can be the wing support, and the other can be the propeller. Then put the desk sides behind your seat as rudders. Well, at 3 years old, I was fairly knowledgeable about airplanes, so I thought, hey, this could be doable. I cleaned out the desk and started to disassemble it. The voice instructed me, no, do it behind the couch so Mom doesn't see what you're doing. Then you can surprise her by flying around the house. I dragged the desk behind the couch and, with a little coaching, made a pretty good semblance of an airplane, if I do say so myself. I sat on the seat and realized it ain't gonna fly. The voice urged, close your eyes and wish really hard to fly and you can. I tried wishing with my eyes closed, but still no luck. You have to wish harder, with all of your heart and belief. So I concentrated really hard on flying, putting all my hope and belief into it. Suddenly the room exploded. I opened my eyes to find the room nearly invisible due to a white mist. I looked over the couch to see what had happened and saw my brother laying on the floor, stunned, right where I would have been sitting. My mother rushed into the room and screamed, "Not at Mayada," and picked my brother up, throwing him onto the couch. From my position behind the couch, I called out, "What, Mom?" She saw me, started crying, and ran over and grabbed me in a big hug. My brother lay on the couch moaning, saying, "Yeah, don't worry about me." He had been in the attic, setting some mouse traps, slipped off the rafter and fell through the ceiling. I never mentioned the voice to anyone, but I explained about making my airplane and doing it behind the couch to surprise her. She was seriously shaken, having briefly believed I had been crushed. I sat on her lap, calming her down, saying, "I'm fine, Mom, and brother seems to be all right, except for his neck and arm hurting." I don't know how I knew that, but it was true. I've never mentioned the voice until now. Even back then, I knew it would make me sound strange. I believe in guardian angels, and in my 61 years, I've been a vessel for them a number of times as needed. Those are other unusual happenings. I got a new desk, and Dad fixed the ceiling. About 8 years ago, I was driving back from working at a party on a Navy base about 2 hours from home. I supplied games and props for themed parties. About 10 minutes outside the base, there was a stretch of road that went through a wooded area before hitting the motorway. As I drove down this road, listening to an audiobook, it occurred to me that I hadn't seen another car on either side of the road for a really long time. I was driving a fully loaded van and got paid hourly, so I was in no rush and cruised along at around 50 to 60 mph, definitely slow enough for any other vehicle to easily overtake me. I left the base at around 1:30 a.m., so it was understandable that there wouldn't be constant traffic, but it was a busy enough area that I expected to see regular vehicles moving around. So I continued through the woods, listening to the book and concentrating on driving, when I looked at the clock on the dash. It was 3:45 a.m. Around 2 hours had passed with me driving through these woods with not a single other vehicle in sight and nothing happening. A few minutes later, my turn came up, so I turned off and hit the motorway for the drive home. Suddenly, a wave of tiredness hit me, prompting me to pull into a service station for a coffee. It was only then that I realized just how long I had been driving. I should have been home by now, and instead, I was only just on the motorway and was still almost 2 hours to go. I checked a map, but there was nothing around that could explain the time it had taken. For context, I live in England, where we barely have any woodland that you couldn't walk across in 2 hours, let alone drive. I decided to carry on home, assuming I had just miscalculated the time. After a night's, or should I say morning, sleep, I thought back to the drive and realized I had almost perfect recall of the audiobook. It was a brand new story, and I had no previous experience with the author, which was unusual for me. I also remembered minute details of things I spotted in the woods, enough to know that I wasn't seeing the same stretch of road over and over again. I recalled a burned-out van covered in police tape, which stood out since it looked almost identical to the one I was driving. A small herd of deer standing by the side of the road, watching me pass, and a short track leading to a worn-out little cottage. To this day, I have no clue what happened, but I spent 2 hours driving through a woodland that the map showed was only a few hundred yards long. Most of the road I was driving on should have been country roads, which I didn't see at all. There was no chance of taking a wrong turn. I'm convinced it was aliens. Thankfully, if I was probed, they were gentle. My job operates 24/7, and I mostly work evenings and nights. We used to have an elderly guy working with us who was always kind of spacey and odd. Anyway, one day I showed up for my 4 p.m. to midnight shift when all of a sudden, my elderly coworker arrived around 5 p.m. He looked at me confused and asked what I was doing there. I replied with something bland like, working. I was the only other person in the office, but we had a few others working from home. He then proceeded to send an email to the entire company, complaining about how none of the work had been done the previous night, which was very confusing for all of us, as the nighttime work wasn't even set to be done yet. Remember, it was only 5 p.m. My manager contacted me from home, asking what was going on. I told him I thought the elderly guy believed it was 5 a.m., since that was when he was scheduled. I was 99% sure that was the case, and for the next 20 to 30 minutes I sat at my workstation, trying not to laugh at the situation. My coworkers were all contacting me to joke about it, making it very hard to maintain my composure. Around 5:30, my elderly coworker got my attention and asked me what time it was. I replied 5:30. He asked AM or PM. I said PM, somehow managing not to burst out laughing at how ridiculous this all was. He simply responded with a confused, "Huh," then didn't say another word as he packed up his things and left. Not a single one of my coworkers or I can convince anyone outside of our company that this actually happened. Just for clarification, I live far enough north that it's dark by 5 p.m. and stays that way until around 6 a.m. in the dead of winter, which is when this occurred. My friend and I took some pills and decided to go for a walk late at night, or rather early in the morning. As we walked past bushes, we heard a rustling sound, which startled us a bit, so we kept moving. About 30 seconds later, we heard a noise behind us and turned around to see it was a badger. Now, since we were feeling quite euphoric, we thought it would be a good idea to charge at the badger while yelling. The badger, startled, turned around and started bolting away, which made us laugh. But then, no joke, the badger slowed down until it came to a full stop and slowly turned to face us. It was as if you could pinpoint the exact moment it decided, not today. Suddenly the badger charged directly at us, and it was quite frightening, especially since we could hear its claws scraping against the concrete. We found refuge standing on a nearby bench, and I swear that little creature circled us for 10 minutes. The first time I took magic mushrooms, I consumed about 30 to 40 grams fresh weight. It was my first experience with psychedelics, and naturally it felt pretty overwhelming when the full force of them kicked in. I knew I had to immediately leave my parents' house, along with my 2 friends, who had also consumed fairly large quantities of Australian gold tops. After many bizarre visual hallucinations, and a 2-hour walk to a beach that should have only taken 15 minutes, I found myself casually walking along the water's edge, enjoying the sensation of the waves lapping at my feet and the now mild visual effects. Suddenly, and inexplicably, I was struck by a presence to my right, and without questioning it, I ran as fast as I could toward the dunes. I almost felt like a witness to my actions rather than the doer, as my body compelled me to run and then dive right over the top of the 6-foot-high sand mounds. I landed with a belly flop, both hands pointed trigger-like at a spot on the ground in front of me. Again, I felt more like a passenger, as I heard my mouth blurt out words, "Hello, little guy, how are you tonight?" To my astonishment, when I looked between my fingers where I was pointing, there was a little echidna. It occurred to me that this could all be a figment of my imagination, and then that echidna could just as easily be a pine cone. However, my 2 slightly less euphoric friends ran over to see what all the fuss was about, and were equally dumbfounded by my sudden dash, 30 meters into the pitch dark for seemingly no reason, followed by a dive over a sand dune to say hello to a creature I had never seen before or since. It made me an instant believer in the potential of magic mushrooms to tune you into something higher, or perhaps just the power of them to convince 3 grown adults that a pine cone was in fact an echidna. When I was in the Marines, we got sent down to a country in the Western Hemisphere. Let's just say it was all jungle, to train the local military. One day, deep in the jungle, we stumbled upon an old temple by complete accident. It was completely covered in weeds and trees. Anyway, our highly educated captain at the time decided to have us camp out in a clearing near it. At about 2 a.m. on my watch, things got really freaky. A sensation came over me like nothing I had ever experienced. I heard a high-pitched humming sound coming from the direction of the temple, and a couple of my fellow Marines heard it too. As they got up to investigate, that's when it all went down. I don't know what they were, but these creatures emerged from the temple. I had no idea if they were hostile or not, but I unloaded my M16, and another Marine fired his M203 in that direction. The smell coming from those things was unforgettable. They scattered or went back inside the temple. I couldn't tell where they went. Of course, the captain and everyone else were now up, asking what the hell had happened. We told him what went down, but he didn't believe us at the time, even after some of the local military guys said they thought they were aliens and claimed to have encountered them before throughout the jungle. When we got back to base camp, we had to brief some government official, not a senior officer like we usually did, on what we had seen. That's when it hit me. We weren't there just to train these guys. We were searching for something, and boy, we found it. I'm not big on conspiracies, but I know what I saw that night, and two of my buddies saw it too. Whatever they were, undiscovered species or aliens, the sound and smell I experienced that night are things I will never forget. Okay. Well, I don't want to be that guy, but I don't believe you. I think that rules of engagement being in place, firing an M203 grenade launcher into an ancient temple, and firing an M16, I don't know. I mean, I've been in South America, in certain rural countries, and our rules of engagement were very strict. So maybe it's a plot of a video game or movie, I don't know. Or if it did happen, I hope you're okay. But sorry to be a doubter. I just moved to the US after living in a different country for 5 years. The area we relocated to wasn't the best, and the decent high school in our area didn't have space for me. So I was enrolled in a high school that was deep in a rough neighborhood. During PE class, I was talking to a couple of girls about the music on my MP3 player when a Hispanic guy with a military buzz cut, tattoos, saggy long shorts, and an oversized shirt walked up to me. The following exchange ensued. Him: "Where are you from?" in a strangely aggressive tone. What goes through my mind? Should I say I just came from country X? Maybe I should say I'm from city E, since that's where I lived before moving to country X. Or should I say city K, since that's where I was born? Forget it. I'll just tell him where I currently live. Me, I'm from R. Him, yeah, that's right, homie. R13 begins to throw gang signs. What goes through my mind? Sign language? I awkwardly followed along with his handshake, and he walked away. The two girls I was talking to were looking at me strangely. I noticed a slight hint of admiration from them, but I wasn't sure why. I then proceeded to share my music with them. For those wondering, the guy walked up to me asking what gang I was a part of. I answered with the name of the city I lived in, and luckily he was a part of the local gang. We did this weird handshake, and I thought to myself that if I had answered with City E or City K, I probably would have been jumped by him or other gang members. This was back in the late 80s, so kids were still able to roam free without supervision. I was probably 8 or 9 at the time. For context, I'm female and my friend was male. We were playing around at our school on a Saturday morning, and there was no one else around. We were just messing around in some trees at the edge of the property. I don't know why, but I looked up and swear I saw about 6 guys in ninja clothes creeping into the schoolyard from the driveway, directly across the yard from where we were sitting. This driveway was surrounded by a fence, and then there were trees along it, so you couldn't see the end from where we were, and it was dark. At first I was absolutely positive I must be hallucinating, because, well, small town in Canada Saturday morning, and here come some random ninjas out of the shadows. But my friend saw them too. We weren't really hiding, but I don't think they could see us. They started doing flips and rolls, sparring with one another, but also looking around in every direction, like it was their first time outside or something. It was incredibly weird and creepy. We were instantly on alert. I can't explain why, but they didn't seem to move like normal people. They were all of normal height, but very thin and lanky. At no point did I see any skin. They were dressed head to toe in black, including hoods that didn't appear to have eye holes. I just looked the place up on Google Maps, and we were at least 75 meters away from them at any given time. So, It's possible I was just too far away to see any great detail. We stayed still and quiet, just watching them. After a while, something startled them, and they broke for cover in perfect unison. Everyone ran in different directions. A couple went behind the school, and we lost sight of them. A couple others went back the way they'd come. At least one jumped over the fence surrounding the yard, clearing it without touching the top. It was like they didn't exert any effort at all. 10 seconds later, some kids walked into the yard with their dog. Whoever they were, they didn't make a single sound the entire time. We watched them for what must have been 20 minutes, maybe longer. Then they just scattered suddenly and were gone in seconds, like it never happened. I went home and told my mother what I'd seen, and my friends backed me up, but no one ever believed us, so we stopped sharing the story. I haven't seen that kid in years, so I can't even ask him if he remembers it happening. Just one of those weird things with no explanation. I used to live in Pennsylvania. At the time, it was illegal to ship alcohol into the state, which meant wine clubs were generally off limits. I went searching for a reasonably priced wine club that would ship to me. I found one, ordered a box, and grinned like a Bond villain when it shipped. The perfect crime. I had the day off from work when it arrived. I went outside, pulled the box in, and set it down in the kitchen. Nice. 10 minutes after I brought the box in, there was a knock on the door. It was a state police detective. My heart sank. Apparently, they were there because someone they had arrested had called my phone number. It was likely a wrong number, but they were evidently looking for an accomplice. They showed me some photos, and I told him I had never met anyone like that. As I saw him off, I noticed 4 or 5 uniformed police officers walking up my driveway. They had evidently taken up positions in my backyard as well, just in case things didn't go well. I guess people have a hard time believing that this mistaken identity thing happened at the same time I received a box of quasi-legal wine. One night, I was at a chill party with a few close friends where we would drink some wine, smoke some pot, and just play games or talk. Anyway, I fell asleep and started sleepwalking. I found myself in the bathroom, completely unaware of my actions. I took my shirt off and began trying to wash it in the sink without any water. My friend followed me to make sure I didn't do anything stupid since I was sleepwalking, and he noticed that my back was badly scratched. When I woke up the next morning, I started my day by chatting with my girlfriend. She told me she had read about entering someone's dreams and that she had tried it the night before. She was unaware of the incident that had happened, so she couldn't have possibly made it up. She mentioned that she tried entering my dream, and at one point we were having a lot of fun, which included some scratching. To this day, I don't know if it was just a strange coincidence or if there was something more mysterious going on.